McLaren showed up to Silverstone with a pace that just seemed like unbelievably out of this world. Jaw was on the floor the entire time. Is this real? Can we, I mean, not that you can see the future and say we can expect this at every single future race, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Is this real?
I mean, it wasn't fake. I mean, which is an unfair answer to your question. I don't think we can project out. I think the number one thing that I know to be true still is that there is still a Mercedes and Ferrari size hole between Red Bull and the rest of the field. Mm-hmm. So what I believe the trend we're starting to see emerge this season is that because Mercedes and Ferrari are unable to take that next step, what's happening is we're seeing midfield teams. I always feel like midfield is the most generic word used in all of Formula One. So let's define it for the purpose of having this conversation. So we have Red Bull. Then we have what I'll call like the sleeping giants, which is Ferrari and Mercedes. And then I will say upper midfield and then slow teams. And yeah. So what we've seen this season is the upper midfield, which I'm going to call Alpine, McLaren, and Aston, able to make these large strides in development that is putting them ahead or on par with our sleeping giants. But there's still that gap to Red Bull because they're coming from too far back, that their big strides aren't closing that gap. And the teams that should be closing the gap with big strides are Mercedes and Ferrari, but they haven't been able to bring that leap in performance. So we saw that with Alpine around the Monaco time. We saw that at the start of the season with Aston Martin, and I guess it was McLaren's turn to jump our sleeping giants. So I did try to pull data to the other side of, is this real? Okay, where are they making up their time? Is this replicable? So this, what we're looking at on the screen here, and again, if you're not watching on YouTube, feel free to come over to YouTube and take a look at all the graphs and stuff, but I'm going to do my best to describe it with words as well, so you don't have to. We're looking at the stint 1 average lap time where all the drivers were on mediums. Oh, fun aside, Nicole. This was the first week where I got to pull data from 7 teams because there were 7 teams that are relevant.
7 teams that had information that you needed to pay attention to.
I know. I actually I pulled McLaren, and I pulled Alpine, and I pulled Williams this week, which is just wild. I know. All the other teams I pull every week, but so essentially we have their average lap time, and then most importantly, everyone's average lap time gap to max on this medium stint. And Norris was 3.5 tenths average lap time to max. Piastri was 4 tenths. And then Lewis was 6, followed by the Ferraris at nearly 8 tenths, Perez at 8.5 tenths. And then you get your first Aston Martin pretty on par with Perez at 8.5 tenths. Then you get Alpine, Williams, and then Stroll. Stroll had a really rough weekend. I won't touch that. So the McLarens were sizably faster on a lap in that during race pace on their mediums than the next closest competitor, which was Lewis. And I don't have Russell here because he was on softs, but I will let you know as an aside that he was doing the same lap time on softs as Lewis was doing on mediums. So I then dug into the sector times because I wanted to learn where McLaren was making up this time compared to all the other teams. So sector 1, Max and Lewis were actually doing the same lap time. Lewis's gap to Max was 4 thousandths of a second on average in sector 1. Then the next fastest was Carlos, followed actually by Alex Albon in the Williams. And down towards the bottom of our rankings here is the McLaren. So they were actually losing about a tenth in sector 1 to Max. But it was sector 2 where they were back on top, where again, they're only losing a tenth to Max in sector 2 when all the other teams are losing anywhere from 3 to 8 tenths in sector 2. And sector 2 is where you get the super fast corners where where you are cornering, but you're not lifted at all. There's no braking happening, like as you go through corpse, essentially. Which is turn 9.
Yes.
Yeah, which I said because I only knew it was corpse because I read that as I said it, just so we're clear. The turn names are very difficult at Silverstone, in my opinion. And then you go to Sector 3, and Sector 3 is where McLaren is losing the most time to the Red Bull, but they're more on par with the Mercedes, where Lando was only losing a little over a tenth, but then Lewis and Piastri were losing 2.5, 3 tenths to Max in Sector 3. So the strength of the McLaren is high-speed cornering, and they were losing almost no time to Max in that compared to all the other teams. So if you're looking for when is the next time McLaren could have a performance like this one, I would look for tracks that have a lot of high-speed corners versus the low-speed area. But they had a good weekend. But I won't rely on anything right now not being a fluke.
Yeah, you never know. We need to see at least a 2-race consistency. Can you hop to Sector 3 really quick? Because I just have either a question / have to point something out to go into my next. Yeah, laughing right here about gap to Max for Oscar and Checo is exactly the same at 0.269. So they're literally both the exact same thing. And if you had told either of us at the start of the season that Oscar Piastri was going to have the same gap to Max as Checo, I would have literally fallen on the floor. So
we don't have enough time to go into the details of the fact of like Checo and his data and numbers compared to Max this week, in race, out of race, all the above. Yes, and I've stared at this for a long time and running these numbers, and I didn't realize that those numbers were exactly identical.
Exactly identical. I was just laughing. I was like, haha, that's so funny to see, but okay.
Before we move on real fast, I did pull qualifying laps for like the fastest lap for Norris, Hamilton, and Verstappen, and then courtesy of F1Tempo.com, which is an awesome site if you just want to pull telemetry, you get this like great map of like where people are strong on a lap, and you'll be able to see like where the McLaren was the strongest to Max and Lewis here, and it just supports the high speed cornering and of it all. Who knows? The fact that we're just here. We're here because Mercedes and Ferrari can't get their head around upgrading their cars right now. And like I don't want to discredit McLaren. Like they did a great job, but like they're not the team we need. Like if we want anyone to compete with Red Bull, like they're not the team we need bringing massive performance upgrades.
No, especially as they were already talking about having massive upgrades and not being happy about their car before the season even started, which is still the funniest thing that happened. And okay,
they were the slowest car in Bahrain. So like, congratulations. But you don't go from being the slowest car in Bahrain to competing with Red Bull. You do exactly what just happened, where you go from the slowest car in Bahrain to like, oh my god, great, we have a podium. But like, we need someone else to do the next.
We need no one can do the next. To wake up and actually have a major upgrade that can catch the Red Bull. But it was fun and exciting to see Lando leading Max for 4 laps just because it was like, oh my goodness, Max is not in P1. Like, wow, interesting. Well, we talked a little bit about Oscar already, and it was looking like he was going to end up on the podium, but, you know, sometimes safety cars happen and people, strategy, whatever, Lewis on the podium, I'm not going to be upset about that at all. Oscar will have his time. So what are the numbers telling us about Oscar? Was this like also just a great weekend for him and it was just bad timing? Give us a little bit of insight of what we can see for him.
Oscar doing well is so exciting to me. I really want him to do well in this sport. And he was touted as this like amazing, great talent, the best thing we've seen since like Max or maybe even Lewis, like crazy, crazy praise. And coming into this weekend, so he didn't get the upgrade last weekend, Only Lando did, which means that Lando has one extra week of knowledge on how to use this car. Then this week, Lando actually has an upgraded front wing that Piastri didn't get. So he's actually a development behind Lando. And the performance he put in was incredible for his 10th race in F1, his first race where he's actually competing for anything. Holy crap, this guy's gonna be good. It is unbelievable. So, he was told just stay behind Lando, and he did, but his race pace on a car that is a development behind was less than a 10th a lap slower than Lando, who everyone is dubbing Lando as like the next great thing of F1. Piastri, not in equal machinery, is doing the same. Absolutely incredible. I spent not only did I spend the entire race impressed, but I then, going through all this data, got even more impressed by him.
Well, I'm excited to see where he's going to go. It kind of felt like it was an inevitable McLaren double podium this weekend, and then, K-Mag does what K-Mag does.
Haas does what Haas does.
Haas does what Haas does. I know, I was going to say, I don't know if I can just plan to, credit that only to K-Mag. But it felt really wild. It felt really incredible. But I need a sleeping giant to have these major upgrades, because I want to keep seeing someone continuously chasing and fighting Max, and it not be like oh my god, look at this every weekend. I want it to be normal for their team.
I like feel-good stories. We need them this season because of... actually, this is the greatest lead someone has had from P1 to P2 in the last 10 years. I think the next closest one after 10 was either 2019 or 2020. Lewis was up by about 40-something points to Bottas. We need feel-good stories. But I would like someone to be competitive and not fake competitive. This week, where Red Bull gets to look at the final time because there was a safety car that closed up the field and pretend they were actually scared of McLaren, so the FIA doesn't smack them down with rules to make the series more competitive. This is... just remember that team principals are politicians. So when Christian Horner is oh yeah, the McLaren was really close and we were really worried about our softs. Okay, yeah. But
yeah.
The McLaren was good this week, and Oscar Piastri was fantastic this week.
It'll be hopeful. That at least will be a continuously interesting teammate battle. Thank you for listening to this highlight from episode 25 of Gridwalk. Don't forget to like and subscribe for a bunch more F1 videos. Also, you made it this far in this video. Why not watch the rest of the podcast? You can click here for the full thing. Ready? Click, 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 click.